All right, everybody. Well, we're excited to welcome you. My name is Michael Cody. I'm one of the founders here of the Coach's Coach, and we're excited to welcome you on this call today. An opportunity to get behind the curtain, if you will, and invest some time together with really somebody who's been a dramatic impact both in Eric's life and in my own, and had some significant contributions to what we consider are the basis for the ongoing and continuing success and significance we enjoy in our lives, and for many other people around the world. And so I'm really excited to welcome today to the call, obviously, Eric Dumbach, my partner and the founder. Eric?
The larger your sphere of responsibility, and in a sense the more specialized or the more you're carrying, the harder it is to find real kindred spirits, and frankly trustworthy kindred spirits or voices or people around you that you can really do life with in a substantial way. And so we have to develop a skill set, an actual skill set of seeking out those kind of relationships and then actually investing in that core relationships around us to help them upgrade into the kind of relationship we need. Most of the time, those don't present themselves to us. We have to help create the very relationships that we're going to need down the road. And people are often willing to go there with us, but they probably haven't experienced it in their own life or haven't seen it. So we need to become, it needs to become a non-negotiable. I need these relationships. I'm going to find them. I'm going to find the potential relationships, and then I'm going to invest in them to help them become the relationships I need to really go where I need to go and be the kind of person I'm called to be.
Absolutely fantastic. So, some of the keys we're talking about in the theme of this call is, sustainable patterns in your life, and that to me seems like a really fundamental building block of that sustainability that you just described there, which is building that. If I'm hearing it correctly, building that web around you of those trusted relationships that really become the fabric of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So you and Eric have been invested now for almost 20 years. Talk about some of the high levels. You don't have to get into the nitty-gritties, but talk about some of the main areas you guys have focused on that have developed into your coaching relationship that have really helped to support growth, success, sustainability, all the things we've just been talking about.
Eric, you want to take a stab at
that? Boy, yeah. There's a couple that come to mind. I guess the first one, that I liked, and I'll just pick up on what Doug said because I think it went by so fast that we may have missed it. We have to be intentional about going after the people that we want to coach us. We have to go after them. We have to pursue them, and we have to get what we want and need out of them, right? The reason this is important to me is over the years, as my life, I went from being a pastor, then I started a local business coaching firm, sold out of that, then started the Coach's Coach, and Michael and I together own several businesses. So there's just been a lot of eras in my life. But one of the things that I've noticed is I can't rely on Doug to come after me. Okay, I have to monitor my own need for coaching, and I have to be willing to go and pursue. And that may mean saying, "Hey, Doug, we need to upgrade our relationship. We need to do things in a different way. We need to change up the regularity or the frequency or the pattern of our calls." So this 20-year coaching relationship that has been in place has morphed and been through a lot of iterations. And so to me, that's one of the main things, is just being aware of what's needed in the different seasons and being willing to make sure that you're getting what you need. Let me stop there because there may be, Doug, you may have some additional thoughts.
Yeah, well, just that's tuning into that seasonal aspect you're touching. That's such a critical issue. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a dynamic, not only based on different kinds of people, but in our own lives, as you're saying, as we evolve, grow, change, as the seasons pass in our own lives, we need to stop and reevaluate consistently. What do I really need now that addresses this stage of life uniquely? And in some cases, that means, like you illustrated in our relationship, an evolution or an upgrade in that relationship, in the nature of it, frequency, whatever. In other cases, it may mean another kind of resource. It may mean any number of kinds of ways that you work at adjusting and adapting to the new season. The key here being, no one's going to do that for me. I've got to be proactive about that. and then I need to have a couple of key partners, ideally, some key partners that are with me, that are not just coming and going, that are with me for the long haul. Even Eric, if we could just take a second here and name the kind of the spousal piece.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, one of the core themes that we've worked on from day one is the concept of our spouse is that that person who's uniquely positioned in our lives, who gets us, who knows us, who sees us in the nitty-gritty in the day-to-day, and we can either relate in a way that empowers our spouse to be not just, you know, friend, lover, partner, household manager, whatever, but also really an exceptionally, this sounds terribly utilitarian, but a useful, a fruitful component of my own kind of growth context, so that I am empowering her, I'm inviting her, I'm even taking cues from her about ways to allow our relationship to become yet another vital component of my own journey of growth. We can choose to do that, or we can choose to kind of hold it at arm's length and not let it have access to our kind of our core identity at that level.
Yes.
Right, right. So, I mean, it's understanding that sustainable life patterns and success in business, in every aspect of life, these things are interconnected. They're not separate boxes. These things fundamentally affect each other at a foundational level. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, interacting with that, I mean, so much of the success or the joy that I have in my career, I would have looked at as an isolated, you know, component or dimension of my life, and wouldn't have looked at it in an integrated, holistic kind of a way. And so this has been one of the ongoing themes in my coaching relationship with Doug over the past couple decades, which is, and we've actually talked about this on another webinar, I think, the 10 life categories, which was an idea that Doug and Charlene developed many years ago. But, you know, we naturally tend to categorize our lives. Business. I'm a business coach, so I think about business. There's my spouse, there's my family, there's my church, there's my financial management, there's my physical fitness. We tend to think in terms of categories, and yet we can develop one category or dimension of our life to the exclusion of the health of the others. And so this has been an ongoing, consistent theme and an area of work in my coaching relationship with Doug, looking at it and saying, okay, how about all these other areas of life that you need to steward, not the least of which, most important of which, is your marriage, your family, you know, your relationship with God and the church, you know, and so forth, which is an important part of my life. But the sustainable momentum we're talking about here, I think, is only possible when all of those things are being viewed as an integrated whole. And see, a lot of people that we deal with, Michael, you and I in our business, the Coach's Coach, and in our other businesses as well, we dispense information, training, best practices on business and business coaching. And yet one of the messages that I know we're hoping gets disseminated through this call is that to be successful as a business coach and to have a sustainable momentum in a business coaching career requires coaching of all kinds, including a coaching from someone like Doug and Charlene, who hold themselves out as executive coaches and really work on the whole person, right?
Absolutely. Let me press pause for a second. If you're just joining us, we're on with Eric Dumbach, founder of the Coach's Coach, and with Doug Fike. And Doug and Eric and the group here were discussing about sustainable life patterns, sustainable success as a business owner or as a business coach. And we're diving into the meat of the foundations of what build a good mentoring relationship and how you build around you really a core network of support that will help you to succeed long term, but that will be with you for the long haul. Trusted advisors, trusted systems in your life that allow you to evolve as a leader and not isolate, and to tap into those patterns which create long-term success. And we've been talking specifically right now about this core role of foundational relationships like marriage and family and things like that, and how the integrated whole of all of this. So these are the main areas that you guys have been diving into.
let's talk about, in that, Doug, if you will, some of the dynamics or some of the common reasons that you see leaders not go here. What are the excuses they give themselves for why they can't get to it, and what would you say to those? How do you address those when you're talking to leaders who have effectively isolated themselves and haven't developed these patterns, and how do they start that journey, if you will?
Well, how many hours do we have here?
You've seen that once or twice, have you, Doug? Apparently.
Yeah, right. Well, it's surprising. It's surprising to me how much one of the significant repetitive patterns that I run across is that we simply haven't seen this kind of thing modeled well in most of our spheres, be it in our in our family systems or in our business cultures, even churches, whatever. We haven't seen this kind of thing modeled well enough, sustainably enough that it kind of is just normal. Like, of course, we need these kind of relationships in our lives, and it's possible them, and you can invest in them, and they're worthwhile, and they're worth making the sacrifice and the commitment to make that happen. So I guess the first thing I'd say is just kind of getting it on the radar, just even registering, hey, this is real, this can happen, and this can have this kind of an impact in your life. You really ought to just consider it. A lot of times it's just that we haven't connected those dots, and sometimes, many times, once people do connect that dot, it's like, are you serious? I could really do that? Is that really common? Well, I don't know how common it is, but kind of registering that this can be done and that it's making it more normal, I guess, in a sense, is a big part of the ethos of leadership and leadership cultures. And then taking that one step further and saying that we tend to immediately think, well, but my situation is unique. No one would really understand my situation, or my responsibility is X, Y, and Z, or for whatever reason we kind of get into this mode that somehow we psychologically isolate ourselves because it wouldn't work for us, or what we carry is so heavy or so unusual or so delicate or so whatever it might be, and it's like we exclude ourselves from it happening in our own lives for reasons that can usually be deconstructed if looked at carefully. But there's a lot of those just small mechanisms in our thinking that the simple reality is, when you look at just statistically, the vast majority of point leaders, executive leaders, are hugely isolated and don't have these things operational. And I'm just saying that part of that is simply because we haven't seen that as a normal, healthy thing to do, and maybe don't believe it could happen.
Doug, that reminds me of a lesson we had talked through once, and you had talked about the difference between values versus patterns.
Yeah.
And how, as leaders, a lot of times, and I know for myself, I've looked in this mirror before, there are things that I value that the patterns of my life don't necessarily would support that I would value those things. Talk about that component, because I see that sometimes as I'm dealing with coaches. I know, Eric, we've had these conversations that a lot of times we as coaches espouse sometimes on couches, but sometimes as coaches we espouse some things that may not be showing up in our lives, and I think that it fundamentally affects our effectiveness. Tell me about your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Well, there's the gap between what we think or what we believe or what we value, and then how we live our lives. That goes right to the core issue of living integrously, of bringing those pieces together, which is that I read a Gallup poll a few years back about America, just a study analysis of American culture. And it indicated that we are one of the most of cultures that have been studied historically. We are like at the very top of the list of the gap between what we say in terms of beliefs, values, so forth, and actually what's what we live out in our lives. That we're like a historical conundrum in that regard as a culture in the United States. And that somehow it's become just too common and too normal to be able to say, well, yeah, I think this, I believe this, I value this, but it's not really working its way out into my life. That's exactly why we need that kind of empowering, authentic relationships around us to help us. It's what I call relational mirroring, that help us look objectively and accurately at the patterns in our life and ultimately where they'll lead. Because one of the things that there's a gap where we say, I want this kind of outcome. I want a healthy marriage and a thriving family, and I don't want to just succeed financially. And in my business, I want to end life in a meaningful, substantial way. But then when you look at the actual patterns of the moment, they're undermining all of those things, which is, again, why we need those outside perspectives in our lives.
Absolutely. Now, it's interesting because you're sometimes known in different realms as being a bit of what they call the sabbatical coach here. And you talk about these patterns of retreat and refocus and relational mirroring and things like that. Help us understand the role that has played in your evolution of coaching others, but also in your own sustainable life patterns. What are these retreats and these things that you guys have developed? What has that turned into, and how has that developed for you?
Yeah, well, in both in my own life, as I've had people walking with me, and then as I've walked with others, especially you take the Type A, hard driving, even different personality types, just the point leader with a lot of responsibility. We can get ourselves into these loops, into these cycles. This is something that I've come to call the myth of our own indispensability. I'm going to say that again.
Can you repeat that? The myth of our what?
The myth of my own indispensability. And we may grin when we hear that, but the painful reality is that we develop systems and even just sociologically and internally in our own being, we actually start to believe our own press. We start to believe that really we are essential to everything around us functioning. And if you think about it, that's a pretty heavy load to carry through life. And there's no question. If you're talking about a point leader, obviously they are hugely, they're critical to the success of the organization, the enterprise, whatever it might be. The discovery is, however, that for long-term fruitfulness, for long-term success, certainly for long-term sustainability, we must develop rhythms of engagement and disengagement, not just because, hey, I'm tired, I need a rest, but because literally we can't even do our best work. We can't even continue the level of creativity and resourcefulness and just handling the stuff that comes our way. We can't sustain that without that kind of a rhythm of engagement, disengagement in our lives in general. And one of the things we have worked at hugely over the years has been finding a lot of creative ways to build those into our lives not just on a every X number of years you should seriously consider taking a sabbatical kind of approach, although I do feel rather passionately about that as well. But in daily and weekly and monthly and quarterly and seasonally and annual patterns, that we find ways to carve out spaces that become sacrosanct, that become inviolable, that become in our relationships with our children. We carve them out for just our own development. It's even the big picture, asking the questions of really, who am I? Why am I on the planet? What am I doing? Kind of pulling back to get that 30,000-foot perspective of our own lives. That we must build those kinds of times in routinely as a normal part of life, so that we can actually have the kind of impact that we want to have long term, and frankly, not burn out, not crash and burn, or even a less spectacular version of burning out is plateauing. We reach a certain point, and we stall out, and it's an unspectacular way of crashing and burning that doesn't get as much flack. But there's a lot of people that just run out of steam, and it's not necessary. It's preventable, but it requires what at first can sound like drastic measures. Like, are you serious? You really expect me to go on a weekly date with my wife and not talk about anything related to the children, our finances, my business, my work, any of our responsibilities? What are we going to talk about? That sounds like that's just a little small window into the kind of things we're talking about. But Eric, you and Deborah embraced this whole philosophy really a long time ago. Maybe you could talk about this in real life.
I'm continually amazed at the reaction that we get from other married couples who look how observe us as a married couple and say, man, how do you guys have what you have? I mean, you're in your early 40s, you have done really well in business, you're leaders, thought leaders in the industries you're involved in, but your marriage is amazing. You guys have amazing kids. So that people rant on, and then but the question I love, Doug, is when they'll say, so, like, what's the number? If you could reduce it to one secret, what would it be? And to make my answer as valuable as possible, and Deborah and I have agreed that this is our stock answer. We always say, well, go out and have a date 1 weekend night per week, because that's what our coach told us to do some 20 years ago, and what it has forced us to do is get away from the hustle and bustle of running an enterprise together, which is what it is really when you build a family. It's running an enterprise together. It's a partnership. It's a business partnership, right? And people, it's a simple thing, right? But it's an example of the way this kind of principle is worked out at a very tangible level, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, it was something that Doug really encouraged us to do, but we are always amazed at how uncommon that is as a practice, in other marriages.
And how difficult it is to do it and sustain it, because it's like all the forces of hell rail. You set out to establish that kind of a routine, and it's amazing how difficult it is to implement something that simple and to sustain it.
Yeah. And then on top of all that, Doug, you have insisted. I mean, and that's a very strong word, but in the context of our coaching relationship now over 2 decades almost, you've insisted on Deborah and I getting away, and even me as an individual leader getting away on a regular basis. You've just drilled that into me. So there's a lot of really practical ways that that works itself out. But for example, every year at the very end of December, I go away for a 2 or 3 day kind of reflection, prayer, meditation, planning retreat alone in a cabin, and I lay out my entire year. I look at, and I just do some planning, thinking, and all the rest. And I've been doing that for years and years and years. We're in a rhythm where we do strategic plans, and we take, actually, Michael and I, who have been running companies together now for, how many years has it been, Michael?
7 years plus.
7 years. We've been running companies together. Michael and I, once a quarter, will go away for a few days and take a little bit of a retreat as business partners and refresh our business plans. And hey, because we're business partners, we need to invest in our relationship too. So we'll play Xbox 360 for a couple hours. And this sustainable momentum only works if there is commitment to deliberate patterns of activity and behavior. And then the biggie, of course, is going away on trips. So last year, I left the business for it was roughly 7 weeks. I just left the business, and Michael, you took it over and ran the business. But I did that as a way of making a significant investment in my sustainability as a business coach. And maybe you guys would both care to comment on that. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll talk to you about this side of the equation. And we did a webinar earlier in the year talking about some of the impact of the sabbatical process, that retreat and refreshment process. And one of the things I noticed in our business that happened was, one, we had a team there in place. So if you're sitting here on the call going, I don't have a team in place, strongly encourage you to develop organization and team around you. It makes a lot of these patterns much easier to sustain. But the other part of it was having the leader come back fresh, renewed, invigorated, with clarity rather than And I love what you talked about, Doug, there, that the unspectacular burnout is the plateau, because that is so true. That it's, I think Covey called it the sharpening the saw principle. You're still out there chopping wood, and yeah, you're felling trees, but you're doing it at about 10% of your actual capacity, because the tools, the spirit of the person doing it is so dull that it's just not, it has no efficacy, and so that was one of the things that came back coming out of there, and actually, coming out of that trip, we launched another company. That company's up to 25, almost 30 employees. It's growing and becoming a leader in its industry, but a lot of that was birthed out of the time you took away to get clarity in your sabbatical. So the net impact for us, even as the whole team that was back here holding down the fort and running the business during that season, was we're all being affected positively because the leader took the time to do that.
And Eric, of course, another big dimension of that time for you was living out some values that you and Deborah have named very highly in terms of your family and your kids, and getting the kind of high caliber time with them before they reach a point where they really aren't interested in having that time with you, because you weren't available when they were interested, and so blocking that time out and establishing those kinds of those reinforcing those foundations, that's a critical part of the whole. And the cool thing about this kind of dynamic, you think, but how could I possibly afford, whether it's that a sabbatical is obvious, but even a personal retreat, or even disengaging for a real day off, once a week, kind of thing. How can I possibly afford to do that? The real reality is, how can you afford not to, in terms of the long-term outcomes of that? But that's not something that's something that you could even give mental assent to, but it's viscerally, I'm not sure we believe that. Do you remember, Eric, in the months, actually the years prior to your sabbatical, but especially that last year, the rounds where you were working on the plans, and part of you was absolutely clear about it, and then you would hit this other thing would just rise up, and you'd say, how can, isn't this irresponsible? How can I do this? And won't my business fall apart? How can I really be returning value to the people I'm committed to if I'm doing this kind of thing? Does this really make sense? Do you remember those moments?
Oh, so true. I mean, the thing that's worth mentioning here is that going away for roughly a 7-week period last year comes in the context of having developed the sabbaticaling or taking a break kind of rhythms and patterns into my life on a smaller scale. So it's not like I just did a 7-week sabbatical out of nowhere. I had been working up to it. I mean, I had been on shorter trips over the years, but for me, it was a whole other level. Can I go away for over a month and a half, leave everything behind, get a single email per day from my business partner, Michael? No, actually, it wasn't even Michael. It was Christy on our team. I got one email a day that said, all is well. I told her before I left, I don't want to hear from the business. I just want a single email that says all is well, so I know you guys are alive and nothing's burned down. So, but I was freaking out just thinking about that. I had moments where I had no faith, but because of the positive experiences, I mean, we had gone on some other trips, Doug, you and I, and you and Charlene and Deborah and I, we had done some other trips that might, 7 days at a time or 14 days at a time. So we had done some smaller trips, and then Deborah and I had, knew what it was to go away for a couple of weeks at a time. But going away for a month and a half, almost 2 months, yeah, I mean, I really struggled with it.
So you have to develop the muscles over time in small, like any kind of a discipline, that physical fitness, whatever. You develop those muscles over time, and you have to have some voices in your life reinforcing these things. I've had the same thing in my own life. Honestly, I've now had, over the course of the last several decades, I've done 3 full-on sabbaticals. That 2 of them were 6 months and 1 was a year, which sounds even. I mean, you're probably scratching your head thinking, how can that possibly be? This is of course what I do, so I really need. It's important for me to really press out and do the thing I'm talking about. But those were absolutely transformational and critical in my growth, my professional development, my family, etc. But in each case, the fact that I had voices, relationships, resourcing around me that was encouraging it, reinforcing it, and helping me when I had the panic attack. like, am I absolutely crazy? Can I really do this? Those were critical in that process of really stepping out and building on the kinds of things you said, that the muscles that were already being developed in weekly days, weekly real days off during the week where you're really going off the radar, off the clock, and personal retreats, and even things as small as dates or walks in the middle of your day where you say, I'm just going to disappear for an hour, and I'm going to take a walk and breathe deep and maybe meditate or pray a little or read something. Those kind of small investments in what we actually, I'm getting a little ahead, I know, Michael, here, but into creating a bounded open spaces in my life that are carved out intentionally, within which I allow unscripted things to happen. That process in a small scale eventually becomes part of a whole set of life skills that become indispensable for this kind of long-term sustainability.
Great. I want to jump in for a second and say, if you're on the call and you're listening and you're wondering, okay, so how does this apply to me? This is the fundamental wish or desire that we have for you, for your sustained success, that you're able to create patterns in your life and surround yourself with people that build you up and help to see those purposes and those unique qualities and giftings that you have come to bear in every facet of your life. And so we're bringing this to you because, yeah, we talk about business coaching, but the truth is the principle that, Eric, I know you and I have always held is that you can't coach businesses without coaching people. Because fundamentally that's what we do. We have to coach people. They all have one thing in common: they own businesses. But the reality is you're coaching people, and those people many times, and I know, Eric, we've talked about this. When you get in there to coach their business, the business isn't what's broke. The business isn't the thing that's got the problem.
Yeah.
It's all of the screwed up life patterns around it that are making the business a tyrant, or are making them slaves to their business because they've not sorted these things out, or they may have all the success in the form of the material aspects of the success of a business, but their life systems in their personal side have been so absolutely devastated by the way that they've carried an imbalance for such a long period of time that really they won the battle but lost the war, if you will, in many aspects when it comes to really finishing well and having really success from these from what they're working at in their lives. So that's our desire for you. We're opening this up to you. We've brought Doug into this conversation with you because we want you to understand that there, as a coach, both for yourself, as a person for yourself, but also the game that we play in influencing others out there in the world, that the ability to bring this conversation to the forefront is really the deeper undercurrent, and I think ultimately more important conversation than whether they put in place better hiring systems or put a better marketing program in place or anything else, is that we're talking about the lives we're impacting as we're coaching businesses. So that's something I wanted to bring to bear and just kind of flag for everyone in there. So I want to highlight at this point and bring it back around, Doug, because you and Charlene and what you guys have been working on has really now amalgamated into this very cool thing called Tocatti. And why don't you fill us in on what Tocatti's doing, how people on this call could start to take practical steps forward if they're interested in starting to implement this kind of stuff, and what are some opportunities that exist for them?
Yeah, well, wanted to actually first mention just a resource, a book I highly recommend if I could do that, a book called The Power of Full Engagement. The Power of Full Engagement. It's co-authored by two gentlemen, Schwartz and Lohr, Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz. That it's coming from a vantage point of long-term research and high-level coaching of high-performance athletes, and they then took their research and began to work with executives and found similar kinds of patterns. The critical need for engagement and disengagement as a key component to sustain peak performance. So just extremely helpful for me. It was a revolutionary book, actually recommended to me by another person. We also have marriage mentors. I have a personal mentor. We have marriage mentors. We actually have lifestyle mentors. We got a bunch of them, But anyway, from our marriage coaches, they recommended this book and had a major impact in our own lives. Highly recommended if you want to just kind of dig into the thinking and some of the science, even neurological and some ancient wisdom literature, all kinds of stuff. They do a great job of just helping us identify, kind of create some new categories for this concept of engagement and disengagement as normal, as normative, and as a way to be about having the kind of long-term impact and sustainable significance that we really all want to have. So let's put that aside just a moment. The evolution of this, a lot of this content, a lot of these processes over time, Charlene and I just began to become aware that this subset, this particular dimension of what we do, just needs a particular focus, needs more handles, because this is just, honestly, this area that we're talking about right now is one of the places where point leaders, leaders of substance, high caliber folks tend to get stuck, tend to get hung up, tend to get in patterns that really bear nasty fruit long term. So that we decided to hone in particularly here and begin to create experiences and resources to make available more broadly, that beyond the circles of people that we are personally coaching or walking with, just kind of broaden that out a little bit and make resources available that enable people to carve out that kind of space. And again, I'll use the language that's become familiar for me, which is to create bounded open space through unique experiences in settings that are incredibly life-giving and stimulating and fun, and that, the kind of thing that's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to miss that. I want to do that. So make that a positive, high value experience, but be doing it not just in a way that, like, hey, you can go on a trip and go take a vacation, but something that's way more, it's intentional, it's focused, it's grounded in these kind of principles. It's resourced by people like Charlene and myself and others that we walk with and live with, that really carry this thing now as part of their lifelong DNA. And so we create a culture that invites people into this kind of space, in settings that actually already do blow people's mind all over the world, have a great time doing it. So Tocatti is really it's just a framework to be kind of be broadening out the circle, inviting people into this kind of space in ways that are accessible, in ways that are memorable, and in ways that kind of get into your blood, and you realize when you go home, you know what, I just tasted something there that needs to become part of the way I do life at a whole new level. It kind of goes viral at that point. At least that's the concept.
Brilliant. And so the Tocatti, though, the actual name, it comes from an Italian toast, correct?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, toccata uno, toccati tutti, meaning touch one, touch all. It really came out of some experiences we had in Italy, exactly in the context that I'm describing here, where I was on sabbatical and we were in that kind of space. The idea being that Tocatti is really about getting deeply in touch. It's getting in touch with your own heart, your own sense of purpose and destiny, and kind of some of the underlying whys of life, and kind of back in getting centered and regaining equilibrium, and getting in touch with your spouse and maybe with your children or with key relationships in your life. And it's just kind of that deep sense of becoming freshly grounded, getting in touch, and then broadening out a circle and hopefully cultivating a set of fresh relationships that some of the kind of experiences that you guys had with us in Italy a couple years ago.
Yeah, that was amazing. So you're going back, and there's some fresh opportunities there for people to discover. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We've been very excited about the Tocatti Opportunities coming up this fall in Tuscany, and we will be back again at the ancient medieval monastery that we now are beginning to frequent there with in the context of what's called amazing setting, nestled in the rolling hills of Chianti, between Siena and Florence, and just a unique setting for some unique experiences that we've really custom crafted. The first one being a workshop, more of a workshop format that's a very, very easy, gentle rhythm of some input, interaction, reflection, particularly around this theme that you've heard us mention a couple times now, the concept of upgrades, of upgrading for a new season of life, personal upgrades, relational upgrades, identity upgrades, upgrades between parents and children, or between key relationships, siblings, spouses, new roles for a new season. So we'll be focusing on this concept of upgrades, which has really been a pivotal concept that we've explored with a lot of folks throughout the years. So that'll be the first week, which is actually going to take place in the latter part of September, and then the very last week of September, a second week, which is a really fun, awesome weekend. That's just an immersion into Tuscan, if I may, viticulture, into everything surrounding the growing and harvesting and of grapes, and the producing of wine, and the celebration of life in Italy around the grape harvest, with just a series of amazing experiences that really you couldn't go out and buy anywhere, just on the market, and creating. But all of that undergirded by this framework, this understanding that we're creating space and a culture, a small culture, even among the people on the trip, where you can then begin to tune in and deeply rest, and then kind of reflect and look at life a little bit, and no better way to think about life from a 30,000-foot level than sitting on the veranda of a medieval monastery drinking a glass of fresh Chianti wine.
Amen to that. So, I just want to step in and say to you, so if you've been with us on this call and you've been listening in, you've been getting a peek behind the curtains on what we think are the deeper and more meaningful questions of success, significance, sustainability as a business coach, but really as a person. And you've been listening in on a conversation with Doug and Eric and myself on the lessons we've been learning as we've sat at Doug's feet, and even as Doug sat at the feet of his mentors, and what's brought that together to create just a fantastic opportunity. So the thing I would say to you right now is, as you've been listening to this, does this resonate with you? Is this something that connects with where you're at in your life, and looking at it and saying, you know what, it is time for an upgrade in my life. It is time for me to take a look at what are the sustainable patterns I'm creating. And if I continue to follow the patterns I'm on, will it actually allow me to finish strong? Will it allow me to finish well in the way that I really envision? Are my values and the patterns of my life lining up to create the kind of significant impact I really believe that I'm here to have and make in this world? And if those are the kind of questions that are resonating for you, if the idea of creating around yourself a starting point to start putting these rhythms in place, to start developing around you an opportunity to start engaging and disengaging, as Doug was discussing on this, so that you can continue to be the vibrant, fresh, powerful impact that you can be, then you really deserve to check out what Doug is doing with Tocatti, what Doug and Charlene have going there, because it's absolutely amazing. We're excited about it. We're participating in it because we believe in these things. Obviously, Eric's described some of the impact it's had for him. We've joined them in 2010 at this same location, this fantastic restored monastery, and we want to open that opportunity to you. And Eric's going to be sending out a link to all of you if you haven't seen it here in the chat. And this is a link to just check out more information. That's our call to action right now. Get out there, discover more information about Tocatti, about what they're doing, and see if this is a good fit for you to start implementing these kinds of patterns in your life. Or if you're already starting the journey of implementing these patterns, a way to really put some booster rockets on it, if you will. Those are type A personality terms, by the way. Type A's want to put booster rockets on things, you know. so how to really reinforce the efforts that you've already begun, because no doubt many of the people in this call, you're fantastic at investing in yourselves, and we just want to encourage that even more. We want to encourage you to value this stuff as not a nice to have, but actually an essential to the foundations of your success. It really is critical. And we just want to put that to you. So if you haven't seen it, the web address is http://bit.ly/Tocatti, Tocatti. Now that's misspelled, so I apologize to everyone else who notices that. But that is the link. And so use that link. It'll take you there. You can get some additional information. You can get some insights into more of what Doug and Charlene are talking about. Examine this in more detail. We just felt like it was really critical to share with you this stuff because it's been so foundational to our own success. Eric, anything you want to add to that?
Well, the time that you and I were in Italy, Michael, with our wives along with the Fikes 2 years ago was life-changing. And, you know, we, as Doug said, tend to get pretty convinced of our indispensability. There's something about walking through the streets of Rome, Florence, you know, through the hills of Tuscany, looking at buildings that are, you know, centuries old and that bring us back to the reality that what we're doing day by day, building our business and companies here, is just really a drop in the bucket compared to all of human history. And being in a setting like that really does give you everything you need to think about what's most important to you, to make investments in the relationships that are most important to you, and do it in the context of fellow sojourners and sitting at the feet of people like Doug and Charlene, whose life is really about helping leaders create sustainable life patterns and win over the long term. So Michael and I are going to be there. We wanted to put this out to you. We are making really very personal invitations to those who are in our inner circle of Premium Plus coaching clients. So if you're one of those, you'll be hearing from us, or probably already have. But really, the invitation is open to others who really want to get in the inner circle with Michael and I and just really get into fellowship around these themes with us, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to stress this not to create some false sense of urgency. There really is very limited space, and this is something worth checking out. It's worth prioritizing. I know 2 years ago when we were considering going, you know, as he said earlier, it seemed like hell and all the universe were aligned against trying to convince us not to do it because, you know, kids, and we have 7 kids at home, so if you've got 1 or 2 kids at home, I can kill that excuse. I did it with 7 kids. And one of them was literally less than a year old. So but it was so powerful, so impactful, so meaningful, and the value back to our family from having done it was huge. So I just want to strongly encourage you, if this has resonated at all with you, you at least deserve to check out the information and then decide from there based on educating yourself if this is a good first step for you or an addition to what you're doing to get rolling with more of this healthy, sustainable patterns for life success. And so again, that address is bit.ly/Tocatti, Tocatti. Great. Thank you, Doug. Any last thoughts, Doug, before we wrap up for them?
Don't wait. Take some kind of small step sooner rather than later. Don't keep holding it off to the someday maybe. The time is now, whatever that means for you.
Well said.
Great. So with that, guys, have an absolutely awesome Wednesday, a productive day. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Eric, for investing in time with us, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye for now.